Annemarie Kramer is a versatile woman with a deep connection to the body and its transformative powers, honed through years of experience in yoga, meditation, and breathwork. She is also a sharp businesswoman, having built a successful yoga practice with 3 locations in California. Annemarie has hosted numerous holistic workshops worldwide and conducts breathwork courses that impact thousands of lives internationally. She speaks calmly on hard-to-understand subjects like death and trauma, and does so in a way that anyone listening can learn and apply her teachings to their own human experience. When you make eye contact with Annemarie, you feel a sense of comfort, as if looking into the eyes of an old friend. I had the pleasure of joining one of her breathwork courses, and it left me feeling like a changed person. Annemarie, welcome.
Thank you.
So nice to be sitting down and chatting with you. And as we were just saying before this, is we kind of make it up as we go along, and we're already ripe into conversation. So I think this will be really fun. I have a fun question I think you'll enjoy to start us off, but what does Shiva, the Hindu god representing destruction and renewal, mean to you?
That's all there is. It's destruction and renewal. I mean, if you think about the world, it's constantly in creation and destruction, even from day to night and night to day. You know, the night darkens and then the day brightens. And so we're constantly in this state of renewal. And the more we can go with the flow and the more we can ease into it and trust the process, the easier life is.
And how did you get introduced to Shiva?
I mean, I've been studying yoga for 28 years. So Shiva is, the main destroyer, the destructor, and he's just always ever present in all of our lives, whether we want to recognize it or not. So I just started studying yoga and everything to do with yoga really for the last 20, 25 years.
And when you start studying yoga, is it pretty quickly that Shiva and the gods of Hinduism are introduced, or is it more, hey, this is the poses? Because I know I've practiced yoga a couple times, and they'll be speaking, or the instructor will say a Hindu phrase, and I'll think, what the hell are they talking about?
Exactly.
Then I'll have to look up when I'm in it. But what are the stages, I guess, of yoga training? Is it?
I mean, I started teaching yoga before there were teacher trainings.
Wow.
So I have a background in exercise physiology. So I was a gym girl. I was teaching spin and step aerobics, you name it, I was teaching it. Yeah. And when yoga came around, I was in Cleveland, Ohio, and it's Cleveland. Nobody's doing yoga. And here was my teacher. We were like, let's do this. And we're like, okay. So we just learned it as we went along. And, the Sanskrit words, that's where these words come from Hinduism. It's Sanskrit language.
Oh, thank you.
And it's just a beautiful language, because in Sanskrit we can use mantra, and mantra, when we repeat it over and over, it calms the mind, right? So this is really one of the main aims of Sanskrit, learning it as a Westerner. But ultimately it doesn't really matter, because yoga is the relationship with yourself. And you can have all these heady words and these ideas, but none of that matters if you're not connecting to yourself. And so, I don't know, it's all like osmosis. It's like learning a whole new language.
Yeah, and I've heard that oftentimes, where in practices it's the instructor will say, hey, do what feels right for your body, which I think is quite foreign for folks in the initial stages, because you just want to follow and copy, and it's like, do the pose only if it feels right. And you're like, well, it never feels right at the start. And kind of how do you start to remove, I guess, your own mind, and then get into the flow of the body and get into the flow of being present with yoga?
Well, ultimately, that's about the breath.
Yeah.
So we have this, I like to call it a bastardization of yoga that's happened in the West. But yoga has always been about our mind. It's the physical practice is to prepare us for meditation, to be able to sit quietly with ourselves and all the crazy thoughts that come up, and have, again, that impermanence of noticing the destructive thoughts, noticing the rebirthing thoughts, and can you stay calm in that? So I think, we're a body-obsessed world, and so we have made yoga about a yoga butt and a six-pack and what we look like and do the poses, which is not the essence of yoga. Yoga is ultimately, the truest sense of yoga is being whole and feeling complete. That's nirvana. That's samadhi, is when we are just good with ourselves, even though there's so much darkness inside of each and every one of us, and when we can make peace with that. And even in Bali, I love living in Bali, because Paul recognizes both the light and the dark. And they do prayers, and they don't push the dark away. They're not saying, like, get rid of the dark. They make peace with it, and they bring it together for wholeness. And that's really yoga.
Yeah, accepting it, the dark side. I like that because I think oftentimes when thoughts come up that are negative or destructive in any sense, at least for myself, is I look at it and I'm almost scared of it. It's like, oh my goodness, how could I think this or how could I do that? But what it sounds like and what the beauty of breath and yoga is realizing that that's just the human experience, and in order to get into yourself, you accept it, but you maybe don't act on it. And then the light is the acceptance that you can move through.
It's funny because I always tell people the first thing you realize when you start meditating is how fucking crazy you are. Like, you're like, what? Like, what is, like, who thinks these crazy thoughts? But this is the good news, because most people have no idea. And they're reacting to their thoughts without even understanding that they're just thoughts.
Yeah, that is very true. I remember meditating the first time and being like, who's this crazy bastard? Like, he needs to get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's totally a choice. Ultimately, as you become aware. So you started referencing yoga as a preparation for lying down, and when we were in the breathwork class, you were in the first third of it, you were referencing, hey, this is all to get to the pose where we lie at the end, and I don't know the Sanskrit word.
We call it Shavasana.
Shavasana, yeah.
But in the Western world, you can call it integration.
Integration, wonderful. And how come, is that how, Shavasana, is that?
Sanskrit.
Does that translate to integration, or is it?
It translates to death.
Translates to death, okay, wonderful. So you gave a speech at Creative Mornings in Sacramento back in 2017.
About death.
About death, yeah. It's super wonderful. And you had a quote in there that was wonderful, that was, life is a series of little deaths that are preparing us for the ultimate one where we die in this life and pass on to the next. That was wonderful. And you encourage the audience to shift perspectives around death and see it as a catalyst for change. And I think it's cool to jump into maybe the two juxtapositions of death as it impacts the individual. And I'd like to jump into the first, which is, what does using death as a catalyst for change look like or feel like? And how do you realize that in your life?
Well, I mean, we only have one life that we remember, and we can use this life to transform ourselves into becoming the best human that we can, and that's really my position on life. And they say the moment of death, like the moment, your consciousness of death is a consciousness that you have at rebirth. And so we're preparing ourselves for our rebirth. And the more work we can do on ourselves, so when we die and we finally let go, that final exhale, we can just be at peace. And that's what death is. It's this constant letting go, and letting go. If you think about it, we're born completely naked with nothing, and we die the same. Everything else is just an attachment. And so these mini Shavasanas is the letting go of the attachments, letting go of the ideas, letting go of the belief systems, the programming, whatever it is, letting it go so that we can come back to our true self, the essence of God, the essence of divine, whatever you want to call it, the universe, whatever it is. There's something bigger than us. Like you once you start doing this work, you're like, wait a minute, it's just not about me. And when you can connect into that, I think you really find the beauty in death.
That's wonderful. And I love the next time I do the Shavasana, I'll definitely use that as the action before that is the total letting go and total removal of attachment everywhere. It certainly is difficult. Super difficult. Yeah.
Well, we're the world on I don't want to say programming in a bad word. There has to be some kind of program, like we have to. But it programs us to think that we need everything. We need this car, we need this, we need this to feel better. But the truth is, like, when we feel okay, just who we are from the inside, we need nothing. That's what the sages did. They gave up everything just to be
one.
Yeah.
And is this the sages, or those who started practicing yoga?
The sages are...
Or the sages, excuse me.
They're the spiritual guides. A lot of them are in India, and they give up all their worldly possessions just to study the practice. And they just work on themselves. And they walk around with loincloths and dirty, and they just are, in their practice.
And do you think it was, I guess, an effort to show the world, or that you don't need anything, or do you think they started practicing it and essentially for themselves?
I think for themselves, yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's this inner knowing that they have a path. Like once you connect to your inner self, you like, oh, this is my purpose, this is my path, and whatever that is, that's for them, you know?
And you almost can't deviate from that path, and if you do, the life or the universe will throw tons of things that throw you back onto it that are usually hard challenges or lessons.
Or you just don't feel
Yeah.
right. Like there's something, like that's, you know, I work with a lot of clients. They're like, I have everything, but there's something in me, it's just not right. And that's because we're not living in our dharma or our purpose.
Mm-hmm. And is that, I've heard it described a lot as vibration, is when you're on the right alignment or vibration. And so much of this, which I totally agree with, is going back into the feeling sense of it, and that you can really feel it, and that your mind might work so much to think that, or to put thoughts in front of you that try and put too much logic or reason behind your decision making. What does it feel like when you're moving in the right vibration?
Well, you already know because you're doing this and you love it and you're so excited. You're like a 5-year-old boy who's just so excited to do this. So you know you're in alignment.
Yeah.
When you feel good, you're in alignment.
Yeah.
When you feel bad, you're not in alignment. It's so simple. It's so simple, but this cognitive mind, this ego mind, this prefrontal cortex that's protecting us, that's the ego that's always protecting us. You have to get that out of the way, and then like, oh, I feel good. Then this is the way. This is the way.
Yeah, and it's really amazing the energy that you continually receive from it, and it is like childlike. You're absolutely right. I feel like a kid getting to be able to explore these types of conversations. So
I know, and I'm
Yeah.
so grateful that you're
Yeah.
on your path, because
Yeah.
when you're on your path, that gives me permission to continue on my path, and everyone around us. So like, I am so happy when people find what they love to do, like even if it's like basket weaving or whatever it is. Like I don't care. Like if you're happy, I'm happy, because that's the collective. You know, when that collective energy, like if you understand, and you know, if you understand that we're all one. Right? Like if you really get that, like we can say that, but if you really, really get it, how I feel about myself contributes to how you feel about yourself, and how every person does. So the more people are living in alignment and feeling good about themselves, they put it in the collective, and the collective vibration rises, and people feel better.
And do you think that shows itself as how you arrive in conversations? Maybe so that the warmth that you give to yourself is you being in alignment, so then it shows itself by when you go into an interaction or you go into a class, you have so much warmth that you're just abundance and giving. Is that maybe the way that it looks?
I think it looks different for everybody. I think when we're in survival energy, which is the lower energy centers, we're only thinking about ourselves, right? Like depression. What are we thinking about when we're depressed? Me. Because we can't think about anybody else, because we're living in fear of some way. Like I don't have enough. There's not something wrong with me, or whatever. We're living in this constriction. And the more that we move into like our heart, into like what we're supposed to be doing, the more we're like, share it with the world. Like, you know, and so when people are in alignment, there's a sharing, there's an offering of your gift, your talent to the world. And I think this is how what I want to help people do, is move from that darkness to their light, like to recognize it.
Yeah. And when someone is feeling depressed, how can they get out of this me? How can they get out of it? And then with your work, how is it that you help guide folks out of it?
I mean, every individual is different, of course. And I battled with depression about 2 years ago, like suicidal depression, where I lost everything, my identity, everything, and I thought I knew the tricks, you know, because I've been practicing yoga and meditation for so long, and breathwork, even in the pranayama, and then when I lost it all, I went into like, I couldn't think about anybody else, and that's when I found the somatic release and the breathwork, and it literally saved my life, because I have 2 kids, I didn't want to get out of bed, you know, all those things, and so working with people and finding out like what is it that's holding them back, like what is the fear, what is the shame, like we're the shame that we feel for who we are is so deep that when we can release that, and that's what the somatics does, instead of the mind Because the mind is pure fuckery, right? Like the mind is like, it tells us stories that are like you said, it makes you crazy.
Yeah.
But the body itself doesn't have a lying mechanism. The body only tells the truth. And so when we can work with somatics, like the shaking, the sighing, the releasing, all this in the mind, we get our truth from our body. And that's when you know you're in alignment because you feel good.
In somatics, for those who don't know, what are somatics?
Somatics, soma means body, and it's releasing energy out of the cellular tissue. So it's shaking, sighing, laughing, crying, orgasms, dancing. It's movement. It's moving energy. Because if you think about emotions, they're just energy in motion. But we get caught in that emotion. So when we can move it, we move it out of the body. And most of us, when we have something stressful or fearful happen, we tighten and hold on. Now, the old brain knows what to do because every animal in nature, which we've talked about before, shakes as soon as something fearful happens. So they release that out of the body. Humans, because of our thinking mind, we hold on. So we can come back to our animal brain and get less reliant on our thinking brain. We can start to release all that energy that's in the nervous system. And then we come back to feeling good.
Yeah, you think of maybe how we're taught how to handle a tough situation is, hey, remain calm and just suck it up. At least in the Western world is, just don't react to all that stuff. But then there's no outlet for, like you just said, of just shaking it off. I remember you used the example of a deer. Is a deer gets spooked by something, and what does it do? You see it shake its entire body and then move on. And we don't necessarily have that. And on somatics, so we did some amazing ones in breathwork. And I remember I think one of my favorite things about you was you made the introduction to somatics not intimidating. It was, hey, this is gonna feel weird because we're gonna play some music and we're gonna dance and you're gonna yell. And I remember being like, hey, shit, I'm from Texas.
Exactly. Yeah.
What do you mean I'm gonna dance and yell with a bunch of strangers with loud music? So I really, really appreciated that. And maybe on a step before that, I'm curious if there's daily somatics or if there's things that one can do or that you think that one should do on a daily basis to maybe relieve anxiety or relax in a situation.
Yeah, I think it's funny people tell you to meditate when you're anxious. When you're so anxious, you're like, I can't meditate. I used to. You can't because your mind is so crazy. And it's really cool because Andrew Huberman, who is a super nerd, a neuro professor out of Stanford, and I'm, as much as I love embodiment, I also love science and nerdiness. But during COVID, he did a study where he had one group of people just go for 5 minutes. And they had the other one do breathwork and meditation. And across all markers, just the simple, the sighing led the study on focus, on overall mood, and happiness. Because we don't know how to let go. And again, like you said, you grew up in Texas.
Yeah.
You're a man. How often were you encouraged to cry?
Not once.
Exactly. Yeah. And not that I think that men should be crying all the time because we do want the men to hold the masculine.
Yeah, of course.
But it's also a beautiful expression. It's also a release. And when you've been taught not to cry, when you've been taught to sit down, shut up, don't make it, like you hold it all in. And then that pain of not being able to express ourselves. Like we're alone with that pain and it's so lonely. I look at kids today, like my daughter, like when she stubs her toe, everyone in the neighborhood knows because she's screaming and yelling and letting it out of her body. She's actually completing the stress response. But when I was a kid, it was like, if you're going to cry, I'm going to give you a reason to cry. So you learned it, like, you held that shit in, like, so you knew. And that's the thing. I think most of us have been conditioned not to express ourselves, and we live in this matrix of something. I mean, it's whatever it is, but where we're just like, go to college, buy a house, 2.5 kids, save money for retirement, then you have fun.
Which is insane when you think about it, and you're, I guess, on the other side of everything. To just say, hey, fun could be had every single day. And fun, I guess fun also looks like self-expression through movement and all of that. And I'm trying to think in my head, when and where did this programming or I guess just the learning of just a different way of receiving emotion, when do you think this started? I know that's a big question.
Oh, I remember exactly the moment.
When did it
I
start?
do.
Yeah.
I was teaching at a festival in Mammoth, California.
Okay.
And this was when I was just dabbling into breath work. I was like,
Yeah.
fingers in. And then I go at this point to a
Yeah.
class that I think is a little bit, I'm like, all right, I'll do it. So I go to this class, and I'm like, when I go to a class, I'm going all in because I have no idea. Even if I'm like, no, I don't like this, I'm still going to do it because I don't know the experience unless I fully go in. So I'm in this class, and we're doing very similar to things that we're doing now. And we're dancing, and we're breathing, and we're moving. And in this moment, I'm in my body. I'm like so into the experience. And the teacher says, humans are the most domesticated animals on the planet. And when I heard that, I heard truth. And my body was like, woof, that's so true. And then from that moment, I was like, okay, how can we free the human spirit? How can we free us domesticated animals? And so that's why I've started doing most of this work of like freedom from the inside out.
That's incredible. And that was when you were introduced to breathwork in that moment?
I've been doing breathwork for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So breathwork is part of yoga. It's called pranayama. It's old ancient practice. But
Mm-hmm.
now they've pulled some of these ancient practices, such as Wim Hof, which is called, I think, Tumi breath. I can't remember the exact name, but Wim Hof is an old breath that the sages were doing in the caves. But all these old ancient practices are coming to life. Like the somatics that I do is called Himalayan Kriya.
Mm.
It was written about in Autobiography of a Yogi, one of the oldest books on yoga. So these are old practices, and we rename them. Just like Joe Dispenza doesn't call them the chakras, he calls them energy centers. Because, when you get too spiritual or you get too woo-woo or whatever, people are like, I'm not doing that. So if we can bring this kind of work into everyday terms, which is why I call it somatic release, because it has more of a science feeling to it, then people are like, oh, I could try that. So...
I really
yeah,
like that,
I've been doing it for a long time, but the emergence of the breath work has been, I think Wim Hof is probably one of the main pushers of like how it all kind of started coming out, and then holotropic breathing.
And Wim Hof, I think, is how I was first introduced to it a couple years ago, and that's the one where you hyperventilate essentially for 20 to 30 or 40 breaths, and then you do a breath hold, and then as long as you go, and then you continue to do it. And you said holotropics. What is holotropics?
This is a great story. So Stan Grofsky, he's a Austrian-German guy.
Yeah.
He was studying psychedelics. And this is back in I think it was like the 60s era, where they were studying psychedelics for a long time. Terence McKenna, and we had Ram Dass at Harvard, and they were studying like what are the effects of psychedelics, because they knew like there was something magical about what they do. Because psychedelic means mind manifesting. So psychedelics rewires the brain. And they were getting all this great research. And all these people were having these amazing experiences with trauma, with releasing and changing and feeling connected. And then, of course, what happens is when people feel connected, they don't want to hurt each other. So people didn't want to go to war.
Oh,
Because
wonderful.
they're like, why would I want to kill my brothers and sisters? Or they're me. They got the oneness. Because when you do psychedelics, you get the oneness.
Yep.
You get it. And so they made psychedelics illegal, right? They shut down all the studies. They made it illegal. And they did all this propaganda that you jump out of buildings when you do psychedelics.
Turned into a glass of orange juice.
Yeah, exactly, which could be possible. And so, they made the scare tactic on psychedelics. And so Stan came up with this breath technique, and someone told me how he found it, and I can't remember. Oh, he noticed how people were breathing when they were doing psychedelics, when they were, and he started watching that, and so he started doing the breath work without the psychedelics, and was getting the same experience, because when you shut off the cognitive mind, you go to the old brain, and then you start to remember.
Wow.
And so he found this breath work through that.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah,
I'm
and
so
now
glad that-
psychedelics, of course, are back in fashion, and they're studying it and seeing all the
Yeah.
great effects of
Yeah,
psychedelics.
and I think everyone should try psychedelics at some point in their life. I think it's wonderful.
Absolutely.
And
To me, it's medicine.
It is, yeah,
Yeah.
it is. And if not, breathwork I think is quite a good introduction to this. And what do you think is the biggest fear that folks have with psychedelics? Maybe still, now that they know it's not as scary as like, oh, you'll jump out of a plane, but there still seems to be, you know what, I don't think it's for me. You know, and maybe I'm referring to someone who is living the cookie cutter life in a white picket fence where they would never touch psychedelics. What do you think that fear is? What do you think that is that's stopping them?
Everyone has their own fears. I have no idea what stops each people, but it does, because people hear about scary trips, right? Like dark experiences. And when you work with these plants and this medicine, it brings forward what you need to see to work on. And most of us don't want to deal with the dark, so we numb it out, right? Like when something bad happens to us, we drink alcohol, smoke pot, porn. So anytime those deep, dark feelings, we just stuff it down. Well, psychedelics doesn't, this mind gets out of the way, and it's like, here you go. This is what you need to look at. This is what you need to work on. And people don't really necessarily want to do that.
Yeah. I think
It's work. Psychedelics is work. It's not take an antidepressant and numb everything out. And I'm not against antidepressants. I sold them for 7 years, and I've taken every single one of them. I was married to a doctor, and I'm grateful for the times that I had them because I didn't have the tools. I did not know better. But taking antidepressants is like a fire going on inside of you, and then the smoke alarm is off. So you don't even realize that fire is still going on inside of you. Or psychedelics is awareness, expanded consciousness. Antidepressants and alcohol is decreasing consciousness. So you're more like a zombie. Yeah? So when people are afraid of psychedelics because they don't want to deal with the trauma, the stuff that happens, because they're going to see it again. They're going to go through it again, and they're going to have to process it because it's the only way.
Yeah. It's fear, and the way I've heard it described is it's crucial for you to go there because that kid, maybe in that moment of the traumatic event, needs you. And the example that you've always wanted for yourself as a kid is actually you. You're the living example that you've always desired and wanted to be. And so that little kid just needs you to go back in there, turn the lights on, and maybe give him a hug. And
yeah, they say trauma is children don't experience trauma because of what happens to them, because of pain.
Yeah.
It's because they're alone in their pain. We're alone in our pain, and that's why connection is the opposite of addiction. That's why connection is the key to feeling good. And that's why doing this work that you're doing, you feel like, oh, I'm so connected. The work I do is I get to connect with people at a real level. I'm not just talking about the weather or like at the hairdresser, just talking about bullshit gossip that doesn't matter. I get to connect with people at a deep level, like right away. And that to me is the medicine.
it really is. It really is. And it's always, when you heal someone else, you're invariably healing yourself. And so it's always about giving and giving and giving. And I heard a quote, I think, from Robin Sharma that was, the one who serves the most earns the most, which I think is really wonderful, a good thing to latch onto. And there are two books that I'm actually reading right now, and I think we talked about them, but it's The Brain's Way of Healing, which I think is wonderful, and then The Body Keeps the Score. And it's so unconventional, both of those things, and that, like you're saying, is medicine is healing for the moment, because if you don't have the tools, it can help you get through day-to-day life. But then when you're able to do things like breath work, you were able to rewire your brain and realize that you're in control. And this is kind of the experience that I had with you. Was I remember I was maybe 30 minutes in, and I raised my hand because you always say, "Hey, I'm here. I'll walk you through it." And you went and held my hand, and it was pushing through it, and it was really wonderful. And then I think that just knowing that transformative power within you exists is wonderful. And I think it's a strange feeling when you release that from your body. Like it's really crazy, because you like, it's a pain maybe you didn't realize, and it like I remember when I I took singing classes for a while, and I was singing, and it was like I was almost crying because it was there was pain in my throat. And I was like I hadn't necessarily been able to speak up as much as I wanted to as a kid or as a young adult or something, and being able to move through it and vibrate through it was wonderful.
Which is why you're doing this work right now, because you get to use your voice.
It feels very, very right.
That's why it's aligned.
And there's some really nice somatics that you were doing beforehand as well that was saying, hey, let's start off really easily. And you walked us through it, and it was wonderful. And it was, let's just tap the chest. Mm-hmm. And that was wonderful. And I think that feels like something that could be used at any point. Mm-hmm. I mean, if the whole world starts tapping the chest, we all know we're going through whatever, and just releasing it. And then the eyes, I think, are another really, really wonderful one. And we're so on the opposite side of death, which this is how we started talking about it. Mm-hmm. We talked about what does it look like when we use death as a catalyst for change, and then what does it look like when death overcomes us and we don't use death as a catalyst for change.
When death overcomes us, meaning like we're afraid of death, or what are you meaning by that?
I think so. So in the speech, you were referring to the perspective that we should have as death when it happens. So it could be the death of a parent, it could be the death of a business, whatever that is, and when it's positive, it looks like recreating and it's rebirthing and all of that. But I think some folks might not always use death as a catalyst for change, and they get stuck.
That's the attachment.
That's the attachment. So it's when you're attached to the event.
Anything.
Or
anything.
When you're attached to anything.
Yeah.
And so your steps actually that you aligned to, there were 3 bullet points, three steps that you said for death, and it was letting go, rebirth, and karma. So letting go, remove any attachment, and then you get the rebirth, and then the last point, karma. What is karma?
Goes around, comes around, right? You reap what you sow. Everything goes back to energy. Karma is just simply energy, and we're magnets of energy. Like, we are magnets. You know this because the people you hang out with are like you. And when your energy changes, when you shift, and you've moved all over the world, so you know this, and you change, you get to reinvent yourself every time you move somewhere. You're like, I'm going to be this person. You get to let go of the old person, and then you attract different friends. Yeah. Because we're magnets, and that's karma.
It's really, really incredible. It is crazy what you get, what you give. Wonderful. So, what is the most recent death that you experienced?
I think the death of my business is in California. That was about 3 years ago. Yeah, like losing everything in COVID. I mean, I lost everything, but I actually walked away. Like, it was the hardest thing I do, and I still, this is the only thing I have regret over in my life. Like, did I make the right choice? Yeah, it was like walking away from my entire life and moving to Bali.
And that was due to COVID closing down?
Yeah, COVID closed things down, and the politics were crazy, and everybody was mad at each other in California, and I had been living this Bali life. I had been going back and forth to Bali, back and forth. I was like, what are we doing here? And it was like, I just felt like I didn't have enough in me to be able to stay there and hold the line.
Yeah.
And so I chose to leave it all and start over.
Yeah, let it go, rebirth, karma.
But that was the hardest death because, I was living the American dream, living in $1 million home, driving Q7, going on snowboarding and all over the world, and then, the next moment I didn't have an income. I didn't have this identity as like yoga queen of Sacramento, so I left it all for the unknown.
Yeah. And
it didn't feel like a choice. Like, how it's like a choiceless choice. Like, I could have stayed. I could have made it work. I could have. But my body was like, no more. And so I chose to walk that path. But that was where I really lost myself and, like, who am I now? And that was a big death of my ego, a big death of my pride, a big death of my self-esteem. Because I had to start over.
Yeah. What was the lesson that you took from that?
One, there's so many, But I think humility was a big one. You know, my yoga teacher used to say, you know, you're a great teacher, you're just not humble. And I'm like, I'm trying to be humble here. But when you have something humbling happen to you, you get real humble.
You get pushed for it.
Yeah, so I think humility and, you know, I've always had a very strong personality. And I think a little bit, I've become more patient, more compassionate. And actually the best thing is, like, I was working so hard. You know, I was in California, you know, you're in the rat race and you don't even know it. Like, I started yoga studio because of passion. And then all of a sudden, you know, 14 years later, I'm on the treadmill. Somehow it became this multi-million-dollar business. It became like a treadmill. I had 2 kids and I had lost sight of my children, you know, because I needed to provide. And so the best thing that's happened is that I get to be here in Bali and be with my kids and get to know them. Yeah. You know, it was a death of one thing, but a birth of being a mom again.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And maybe go back to the core of why you started yoga, in some sense of connecting and healing others.
Because it became a financial numbers game.
Yeah.
It's like, there's
How
like,
to get more classes done.
Yeah. Trainings.
Yeah. Or trainings, yeah. And so it's, how does someone who's so spiritually maybe bulletproof, I could describe you as, who still fell within the trap, let's call it, how can on that same line, if you were to go back, how would you avoid falling in that trap?
Which trap?
The one of the money numbers game.
Oh,
Hey,
gosh.
you know, you're doing the yoga, you're doing all of that, you're out, you're building the business for the connecting reasons, and then it started to slip into more and more and more and more attachment, maybe.
Yeah, more attachment.
Yeah.
How do you avoid that? I mean, I think everyone's different, but for me, it's like just getting to the true essence of connection, like remembering that that's why I'm here, that all the other stuff is just stuff. Like, being present with you is way more important than a Gucci handbag.
Yeah, it is.
Just remembering, and that's the practice too. Like, coming back to my yoga practice, my meditation practice, my somatics practice, my breathwork practice is coming back. Like, because again, we're so bombarded with all this information that we have to keep coming back to the self.
I think that answered the another question I had on this. On as we grow older, as we get more and more wise in life, does the deaths that we experience become easier?
I mean, everyone's different. You know, I have friends that are afraid to death to die. You know, that are afraid of all death and afraid of change.
Yeah.
You know, death is change. What do they say? The only change we like is the kind that's in our pockets. Because we feel safe in rhythm and routine as a human, and we feel safe. Like, safety is the first root chakra, and so change, you have to be willing to be unsafe for change. So, I don't know. I mean, I don't really know the answer.
Do you think
I don't have any answers, actually. I really have no answers. Yeah.
Do you think it's maybe we've gone through so much stuff, so we have this expectation that the world can throw nothing else at me because I've gone through all this shit. But holding on to the expectation that you can go through anything might be what is the hardest lesson, again, of saying, hey, there's always unknown out there, so prepare yourself for unknown. Be grateful for everything you have, and just know that things could change in an instant.
Yeah, and I think every hardship is preparing us for the next stage in our life. Like, everything is preparing us for the next stage. Just like we talked about the business that you were in, you're like, why was I in this business? But it prepared you for this.
Yeah.
So even though we have to go through those strippings of the way in order it's like a snake shedding its skin. When all these hard things happen, we shed a skin of an identity that wasn't ours anymore, that we grew into something new. So we have to have that. I mean, think about it. We don't want to change, but how boring would it be if our life was always the same?
Would it be a good story?
It would be a story. I don't know how exciting of a story it would be. You know, you think about the factory workers that worked the same job for 50 years. I mean, that to me is death.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, to never have lived.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's wonderful. And actually, on that same note, with the Creative Mornings talk, you shared the quote that I was talking about before this off screen, where I was talking about the other time, which is "Comfort is poison," which I thought it was a very, very good quote, and it truly is which is such a challenging balance to figure out in life. Is you want to make your world, you want to make your friends and your family and your kids comfortable, but at the same time, too much comfort is poison, as you said. So you have to know just enough. How can we allow enough growth to come in while maintaining sanity? And I think, a lot of these things are preparing me to be a good father at some point in my life. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I perceive to happen is when I have kids, I'm curious how I will handle the challenge of not wanting your child to get hurt, but knowing that they must get hurt in order to grow in life. How have you handled that?
I'm actually pretty good with that one. Maybe because I've been hurt so much, and I also believe in my children.
Yeah.
And I always say this, even as I'm teaching, like as parents and as teachers, we're just holding space for them to work out their things, to go through what they need to go through their struggles. Like I can't. All the students that I work with, I still work with students that have really traumatic things happen to them. All I can do is hold space. I can be there in their pain. As I said, children, would I say something like children, trauma is not the pain, it's being alone with their pain. Pain is part of life. And the Buddha said that even. Suffering is part of life. But can we be there with each other in their pain? And can we sit with their pain without trying to push it down or make it worse, and just be there? And I think that is the same thing with teaching and parenting, is you're just holding space, because it's their life. Like, we want to guide them, but also it's their life. Like, they're their own being. It's just holding space.
And that sounds so loving. And how does that look when a child breaks their hand or maybe gets in a fight with someone? What does that look like from a mother's perspective? Is that asking them, hey, what happened here, and letting them describe their pain, or what does that look like?
I find that most people, even adults, are more physical than that.
Yeah.
It's the holding. Like, even my son, he's 12, and he does not want to hug, but if I start wrestling him and BJJ, he does BJJ. If I start like, in minutes, he's like, oh.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And then, I teach breathwork.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many 80-kilo guys, I'm like, could you come over and hug me? We just want to be held. We just want someone to hold us. And so I think physical touch is one of the biggest gifts that we can give to our children. Attached, they're part of us, especially when they're young. Never push your kid into a bed down the hall. Sleep with your kids, hold them tight. When they're crying, hold them tight. When they're laughing, laugh with them. Be connected as much as possible, especially if they're going through a tough time. Sit next to them. I used to get lazy, right? I was tired. I was running a business and I had 2 kids, and they would be having a problem. What? And I'd go from here.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work. But if I would just walk over and sit next to them, what?
Yeah.
I can still be mad. The proximity, the comfort is so different.
It's so important. Yeah, I can just imagine that happening with the kid when there's a parent far away who's saying something versus a parent next to him. You tell them frustrated, but I'm here next to you and I love you.
Yeah, and acknowledge their feelings. That's one thing that I think often doesn't happen. Kids will wake up and say, I'm tired. What a parent say, you just slept 10 hours. That's not validating their feelings, I'm hungry. You just ate. Yeah, I'm still hungry. You know what I mean? We have to validate our kids' feelings so that they can stay true to their intuition.
It's so.
We tell them what they feel is incorrect, then they don't trust themselves.
Yeah, and that's a total fault to give to a child, is if they start to mistrust themselves and they can't take risk when they need to be as an adult. And it's so interesting, in therapy, all it is validation. All it is validation.
Yeah.
I'm going through this, and it's saying, it sounds like you're going through a hard time. It's like, fucking finally, someone said that. So I think that's a wonderful lesson to take from parenthood.
And parenthood is going to give you all the lessons that you don't want. Like
from a parent's perspective.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I was doing yoga for a long time before I had kids, and I thought I was spiritually evolved. And then I had kids, and I was like, going to go ahead and start at zero. Because it's like everything that you haven't worked on, every mirror, every shadow is like right here.
Do you think there's ever do you think it's possible to work through everything before you have kids? Or is it kind of, it's one of those things?
Have the tools.
Yeah.
People always say, just have the tools.
Yeah.
You just have to have the tools. Because the stuff is always going to keep coming up. Different things are going to come up, and you just have to keep sharpening your tool belt.
Wow. And it feels like a lot of it is grace and silence and just sitting and validating. And when you get to moments of just like total frustration or whatever it is, how do you remove yourself, and by you I mean me, but like how do you remove yourself from that frustration that you have in the moment in order to remind yourself, hey, it's not anger, love is what you must direct?
Well, I'm not perfect. Sometimes I'm a pit bull with my kids.
Yeah.
When I was a young mom, I used to lock myself in the bathroom. And the kids would be pounding on the door. I'm like, it's not safe for me to come out. It's not safe for me to come out because I was in such overwhelm. Yeah,
of course.
I was just in such overwhelm. So I literally used to lock myself in the bathroom and just take deep breaths or do whatever I had to do to regain myself. Because coming to your center, and this is, gosh, I really wish I would have known this when I was a young mom. And I think it was Gabrielle Bernstein said this, like when you have kids, you have to regulate your nervous system, not only for yourself, but you have to regulate your nervous system for your kids. So if you are not calm and peaceful and they go off, you end up matching them because their frequency wins. Like the highest energy, you become that. I can't tell you how many times I became a 5-year-old. I'm like, what? And I know better. I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I arguing? Like, what am I doing?
It's an argument about like pasta shapes or
something. Yeah,
something.
exactly. And I'm like, and I'm losing my shit over pasta shapes. And it's like, really? Because I wasn't regulated. I wasn't calm.
Yeah.
And, I grew up in a very traumatic, unsafe environment with an alcoholic, physically abusive father. So I had a lot of anxiety and unsafety in my body. And I worked through a lot before I had kids. But I didn't realize, it's like, oh.
Damn it. Here we go again.
So staying calm, having the tools that you need to get calm is the key.
When you went through traumatic moments as a kid, how did the trauma manifest itself in your life?
Oh, yeah, I have a pretty dark past. I ran away from home when I was 18. I hitchhiked from Cleveland, Ohio to Florida, so 1,800 miles.
Holy cow.
Hitchhiking.
Holy cow. Wow.
So I walked out of the house and put my thumb out. I was like, I'm out of here. Like, I knew it was an unsafe environment. Yeah. So I'm a risk taker. I think that actually unsafe feels safe. Mm-hmm. And that for me is something I'm learning. Is like, how can I just stay and be? Yeah. Running is always safe for me, running away. So it showed up as running away. It showed up as drugs. It showed up as alcohol. It showed up as, promiscuity. It showed up as anger, physically abusive relationships. You name it, I've been through it. I used to have physically abusive relationships because I would just choose my father again, over and over again, until I healed that part of me. So yeah, it was yoga and all this stuff is, I don't know how I was so blessed to find this path. Because there are people in my family that are still doing those things. They're still in that physically abusive relationship. They're still doing the drugs, the alcohol. Yeah. They've never jumped out. And I'm so grateful that I have found a path, a tool, so I can work through this stuff so I can move into a healthier way of being.
How did you find those tools?
I found yoga.
And how did you discover yoga?
I was in college for a degree with exercise physiology, and I had to take an extracurricular outside of college, which wasn't, I don't even remember what we were doing in college, but, basketball, running, lifting weights, all that kind of stuff. And so I had this really cute chiropractor because I was into bodybuilding. I was training as a bodybuilder. And I had this really cute chiropractor, and he was doing yoga. So I was like, I'll do yoga.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I found yoga.
Well, thank God for the cute yoga
Yeah,
or chiropractor guy.
yeah.
That's wonderful. And then from there, I imagine you started to realize it wasn't just about the cute chiropractor. He was like, oh, okay, there's cool learnings within this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so for those who don't necessarily have a cute chiropractor to look towards as a lighthouse, and they're in these situations, I guess how can we bring self-awareness into a situation that is trauma, that this is something that's unresolved, and life is showing me that I must resolve it.
How can we bring awareness?
Yeah, how can we bring awareness to this and know that your circumstances might be trauma from your childhood that is manifesting in an abusive relationship or substance abuse?
Well, awareness, as Deepak Chopra says, is a birthplace of possibility, but to find awareness, that's different for everybody again, because sometimes it's hitting rock bottom. You know, sometimes people are trying to save these people. I'm like, they got to hit rock bottom. They got to find it themselves. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's the birth of a child. It's finding a new partner. I mean, everyone has a different level, a different way of waking up out of the slumber of misery. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. I can't say. It's just like every person is so different, and their paths are so different. But if they're ready, if their soul is ready, they'll find it.
It'll happen.
Yeah. But if they're looking and they know that for me, it's always like someone's always looking. They're like, something is not right. Something could be more. Yeah. They find it.
Yeah. It's almost as if as soon as you invite that question in, then maybe that's the open door of there's things to look forward. And it's really wonderful when you think of any circumstance that you might be in that isn't favorable, and you realize it's not, hey, your fault. It's like, oh shit, I can take action and I can go look in the mirror and maybe give love. It feels like love is just always
Love is always the answer.
Love is always the answer, no matter what.
Well, Marianne Williamson said this really beautiful quote years ago, and I never thought about it. Every single thing we do, everything we do, is either an act of love or a cry for love.
Mm-hmm. I could very easily see that, because I think you can, thinking of things that I'll do that might be showy or whatever, and we live in an age of social media, and that in itself can be such a cry for love in many senses, and then an act of love might be using that same platform of highlighting someone else or something else or some practice. But yeah, it's really nice to think of it like that, because then you can bring space before you take action. You can bring the awareness before you take action and just say, what am I doing? Am I crying or am I giving?
Yeah, and also other people, when they come to you, you're like, that person is the most annoying person.
Yeah.
They just want to be seen. They just want to be heard. I mean, look at social media. Look at me. We just want to be seen. I mean, my kids all day long. My son's skateboarding. He's like, Mom, watch. Okay. Watch. Like the same trick 100 times. He wants me to watch every single one. Look at me. And when we didn't get attention as kids, like, we're just going to keep seeking it because we want to be validated. Yeah. Just like your therapist. Yeah. You know, you pay someone $150 an hour to say, you're good. And you're like,
no way.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's when you look back on the moment, the interaction between mom and child or father and child, and yeah, it is just like, hey, look at this, and you're so excited to show a trick or whatever it is, a frog that you might have caught, and all it is just seeing, and you're like, oh, that's wonderful. But it's so easy to get caught up in everything else and move away. And I think a lot of it seems to be generational, which it feels like that's like trauma can be passed on generational. And there's a thing I went through as a kid, and I dove into it and realized, holy cow, like my parental figure had gone through that same thing as a kid, and it wasn't conscious. It was inherited muscle memory, and and the only thing you can give is forgiveness and understanding, and know that when you bring awareness to whatever that is that might be generational, is that's where it stops. Yeah, it's really It's really nice that whatever circumstance you are in, from an emotional pain or traumatic pain, is that you can always improve. Forgiveness. What does forgiveness
Ooh,
look like?
I have a new one on forgiveness, and this is actually from my coach. I used to really work on forgiveness because they say that's like the key to freedom, right? Forgive yourself, forgive your parents, forgive anyone who's hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
But my coach said to me, when you say forgive, you're implying that they did something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You're implying that you did something wrong. Rather than forgiveness, acceptance and understanding. And that hit me as a new way to shift from forgiveness is accepting, because hurt people, right? Like, I mean, like, they don't mean it. I don't think at our core that we mean to hurt other people, but when we're in so much pain, we don't know how, we can't keep it to ourselves. And so when we can just have acceptance and understanding versus imply that they did something wrong, I think that's a new level of growth, I guess.
It's a way new level, because when you imply that someone did something wrong, a lot of times, I think, for myself at least, I get attached to maybe it not being a mistake, but being a bad person for this. And it's like, no, it's a human experience. You're going to make mistakes, and acceptance of you or me is the realization that happens, and move on.
We can always change our past too. If you think about this, you say you have a girlfriend and she was really not nice to you.
Mm-hmm.
Like whatever, cheated on you, just never showed up for you, whatever. Mm-hmm. And finally you break away, but your memory of her is not nice. You're just like, like she was this, she was that. And a year later, she invites you to coffee. She says, listen, I'm really sorry, like, for how I showed up in our relationship. Like, I was going through this, and this. I couldn't tell you about it. It was so dark for me. I had so much shame. I don't like who I was in our relationship, and I'm really sorry. Your memory of her changes immediately.
Completely, yeah.
So we can always change our memory, our past memories, but with acceptance and compassion. And like understanding that whatever they were going through, it's not really about us.
That's really nice. I think it's tough to remove ourselves from the spotlight in it.
Me.
Yeah.
It's all about me.
Yeah,
and it
true.
is, I mean, we are the center of our own universe. That's for sure.
Yeah. In those moments of, let's say, forgiveness, do you, maybe that sounds like a nice closure to some circumstance that might have happened. And do you see closure as something that is, do you need to speak to the other person with closure, or does closure look like something more internally on something that might have happened with the parent or with the relationship?
I think it's internal.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, it's not personal, and it's not about them, and it's like you have to just be okay. You have to let go.
Mm-hmm.
You have to let go. And again, you have to die.
Mm-hmm.
The little deaths over and over again of what we're attached to.
Yeah. All preparation. Yeah. No, I like that new look of forgiveness. I'm going to start wearing that one, acceptance. Who do you aspire to be?
Who do I aspire to be? Everyone. Because I am everyone.
Yeah.
But I mean, if I aspire to be somebody, I mean, I love Joe Dispenza. Like, I love the work he's doing. Like, I always tell people he's my boyfriend. Because I like what he's doing. Yeah. He's changing people on an energetic level. He's bringing science. He's bringing the mystics into science in such an eloquent way. And I think I really like that. Because I think there's so much. I love the mystical world. I love the psychedelic world. Mm-hmm. I love the connectedness of the divine. And once you've had that experience, it's like hard. It's like you can't go back. It's like once you go to Burning Man, you see the world differently.
You keep saying, this is my last Burning Man this year. But you keep going back.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a real world where people are free and kind. And, yeah, there's no money exchanged. You give a gift the whole time you're there. You're just giving and receiving, giving and receiving. It's really beautiful.
For no one who's ever been to Burning Man, myself included, you see it and you're kind of like, I don't know if that's for me. You're a little bit intimidated.
Then you're not ready.
I'm not ready. Shit. By getting ready, should I go, or how do I get to the point of being
I can't
ready?
answer that question.
Yeah, you're
for
right.
you.
Damn it. These are all questions I need to ask. I'll have a podcast with a mirror, and I'll be asking.
I read this
answering.
book, Stealing Fire. I read the book Stealing Fire by Jamie Wheel and the Flow Genome. It's all about flow state.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read that book, it was like, I'm going to Burning Man.
Really? Holy cow. What was the biggest lesson you received from a lesson from this that stuck with you?
The book or
Yeah,
Burning
from the
Man?
book. Oh, let's do both.
From the book, that we're always trying to get to flow state. And kids are in flow state before the age of 7 to 9. They are always in flow state. They're in creative world. They're present, and we're trying to get back there. And when we're present, we're in flow state. And that's why I like all this work, because when we're in this thinking mind, again, it's just noisy. That's why I do somatics and breathwork, because I don't know if you remember the Shavasana, how peaceful was that Shavasana?
It's fucking amazing.
Exactly.
It was amazing.
You're like, this is me.
Yeah.
And that's what that book is about, getting into flow state. It talks about Navy SEALs and how they make Navy SEALs, and how when Google took that massive leap, instead of interviewing their CEOs, they took them all to Burning Man to see how they would fare in an environment like Burning Man.
That happened?
Yeah.
Wow, I had no idea.
And
So
they picked their CEO that took Google from, I can't remember the money was, but it was like big chunk. How do you handle because Burning Man's an adverse environment too. It's really fun, but it's also a lot of work. Making a sandwich is like a 3-day process, So yeah, I mean, that book was Stealing Fire, like stealing, Prometheus stole fire from the gods. That was a really cool book.
So is it?
I have it. I'll let you borrow it.
Yeah, please. I love it. And then second part. So lessons learned from Burning Man.
Burning Man, everyone's welcome.
Mm-hmm.
It's about radical self-reliance. So first of all, you got to take care of yourself. There's 10 principles of Burning Man that you live for the week. And the first one is radical self-reliance. Like you go in there and you need everything you need for a week. There's nothing to buy. You can't buy anything besides ice to keep your food cold. Nothing to buy. Something breaks down, you got to figure it out. So you have to be radically self-reliant, and I love that.
That's number one.
Yeah, number one.
I really like that. Yeah.
Yeah, because people, we play the victim role. I can't do that. You have to figure it out.
Yeah.
Like last year, there was a rain mud storm where people, they had to figure it out. The next one is radical expression, and I love that because people get to really express themselves in the weirdest ways. And you're just like, you go, girl. Like you see people, you're like, that is so awesome. Like, it's just so liberating to see people, like men walking around with nothing on, like naked. Like when did women can go topless. Women are more accepted to be naked than men. But when do men get to just be? And I just appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes not at 6 o'clock in the morning, but
Hey, put that down.
Yeah, exactly. But that was like the biggest thing to me, and coming together and giving. Like you go there and you give something of yourself.
That's wonderful. I like that. And are you able to take that to the rest of the world of this, and share those lessons to others? I mean, I'm receiving it right now, so it's quite nice. And do you think that those lessons can be shared to the rest of the world?
Absolutely.
Because I feel like
that's why you go there. You fill your cup. Like that's why you do your practice. You fill your own cup first, and then you can give. Because if we are again in depressive states and survival states, we are just thinking about ourselves. But when our cup is full, then we are a giving human being.
I really like that.
Be a helper versus a helpey. I
like that. Yeah. And there's always more to give. You talked about the flow state kind of parenting, and this I'm curious how more so flow state of just like relationships work from a masculine and feminine, and from a parental perspective, there's the male the masculine, that always is maybe more strong and intense, that embodies the father figure, but oftentimes it feels that that's not there's other lessons that we should learn when we're a young man or young woman from the Father, which is sensitivity and all these other things in addition to direction and all of that. And so I'm trying to formulate a question on this, but most of it is in the family unit. How do the masculine and feminine, I guess, combine to provide teachings for kids?
Everybody's different, right? I mean, this is like such a big question where, in my relationship, my baby daddy, my ex, is like, he's like, when I first met him, he's like tattooed, he had a silver tooth, he was
Holy
like,
shit.
like, I was like, yeah, because I'm pretty strong.
Yes.
And I need a strong man to hold that space. But when I met him, he was like the kindest, sweetest person in the world, right? So I even call him the Fami, the father mommy, because even though he's like big and burly and he could, he was a bodyguard, he could mess you up, he's also the kindest, sensitive person too. But every man has a different quality. And the masculine and feminine energies they always attract their like partner. And so you got to find your own way with your partner, whatever that way is. And again, like I was the money maker and the mother. That was a really hard time for me because I was so depleted. I was so anxious because I just didn't have enough to give. But he was always in the background helping me. And that was our relationship, and it worked. Other people, like other men, hold the space where the women can be a mother for the whole time and not have to work. Like so it's like hard to say because every relationship is so different. But I do love the Way of the Superior Man book. If you've ever read that book,
I just listened to it recently.
Yeah,
it's super fascinating.
Yeah, I do love that because you'll find your match.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of it describes, which is, it's interesting because I've never heard a balance like that before, and I'm reading and listening to this and asking because I'm curious and understand more. And a lot of it is for the masculine, it's to appreciate, or for the man at least in that, is to appreciate the feminine and the presence of the feminine, because it throws you right into the now, and to not necessarily try and make sense of everything, but to just embrace the presence of the now and like appreciate beauty, appreciate femininity, and appreciate the roller coaster that the feminine takes you on, and just not be like, oh, I'm upset, and be like, well, let's try and sit down and fix it. It's like, well, just be there. Same thing of being present. So
Make her laugh.
Make her laugh. Go up and kiss her. Yeah, hold her, pick her up, and give an act of love. And I think that's really wonderful. It's
the same thing with kids.
Same thing with kids. Yeah. Yeah, give them love. Respond with love. Yeah. It's one of a super interesting book. And I think on the note, why is it there are some people around the world where you seem to be able to connect instantly with the look of an eye? What is that?
The receptivity.
Yeah. So it comes from the self, and the other person also being in that same moment of reception, and being in the same level of maybe self-love, and being able to receive the other one.
Yeah, and also confidence and courage. It takes a lot of courage to let people see you.
Yeah.
And to see other people.
Yeah.
I think this is why we like Bali, because we are surrounded by people who have left their countries to come to have a greater connection.
Yeah.
Serve a purpose at a different level.
Yeah. There's a communal boldness that exists. And
Yeah, because you got to be bold to live in. You're away from everything.
You're very far. Yeah.
And like you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Either you have a trust fund, or you're an entrepreneur.
True.
Because you can't work in Bali.
No.
You can't get a job here.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to figure things out. You have to be self-reliant.
Self-reliant, radically. Amazing. Well, we've gone through all my questions and more, and I'm so grateful for you. And I'm not sure if there's any other things that you wanted to chat or discuss about, but the breathwork that you do is truly transformative to me. And I know to so many other people, so I'm so grateful that you had the little death of your business in Sacramento, as painful as it was.
Yeah.
And no, I'm so grateful. So thank you for.
Thank you, and I'm really grateful that you're doing your gift, that you are in your purpose.
Thank you.
Adding to the collective. Yeah.
Thank you.